This is Jill Pack with the Seasons of Joy podcast, and this is episode number 99, entitled Healing Trauma with Cami Birdno. Are you a woman of faith who is struggling to navigate your current season of life? Do you feel like life is just happening to you instead of for you? My name is Jill Pack. I'm a certified life coach and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I want you to know that no matter your season or circumstance, it is possible to create a more joyful life. And I would love to show you how. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm so excited to be here and share this week's episode with you. But before I get started, I wanted to share with you two fun announcements. The first one is that I finally have more detailed information to share with you about my upcoming one-day workshop called Navigating Midlife with Grace, Strengthening Connections with Yourself, Others, and God. I am beyond excited to share this with you. The purpose of this workshop is to help empower women of faith in the mid-season of life as they work on deepening their relationships with themselves, with others, and with God, and providing them with practical tools and strategies to do just that. This is an opportunity to gather with other women of faith in a safe and supportive space to share experiences and to connect with one another. This is an in-person workshop, and it will be held on March 23rd from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Cache Valley, Utah, just about 10 miles outside of Logan, Utah. Do you feel unsure of your purpose now that your children are raised? Do you feel unsure of what you even like to do anymore? Do you feel unsure about how to act or interact with your adult children? Do you feel unsure how to connect with your spouse now that you are the only two at home? And do you feel unsure how to connect with God when you're feeling so lost? If this sounds like you, I don't want you to miss this amazing opportunity. If you come to this workshop, you are going to get a full day of comprehensive hands-on workshopping, a deep dive into ways to help you strengthen connection in your relationships. We're going to be focusing on the relationships you have with yourself, with others, and with God. And we're going to be incorporating mindfulness and restorative practices throughout the workshop to provide you opportunities to be still and reflect on what you're learning. There are going to be multiple opportunities to be coached and watch coaching live. This provides you the opportunity to actually see the concepts that you're going to be learning applied to real circumstances. So you can learn more about my Navigating Mid-Season with Grace workshop by visiting my website, www.seasons-coaching.com/workshops. Registration is now open, but it is limited to 35 women, and I would love to have you be one of them. My second announcement is about my 100th podcast episode. I've been alluding to this for a few weeks now. The time has finally arrived. That 100th episode is going to be dropping next Tuesday, February 27th. So keep your eye out for that. This is so exciting to me. And I began this journey almost 2 years ago, and I could never have believed that it would be possible for me to really make it this far. Thank you for being here with me on this journey. I so appreciate it. So as you know, I want to do something special to celebrate. So I'm going to be giving away one free registration to my Navigating Midlife with Grace workshop in March. You're going to have to listen to next week's episode, the 100th episode, to get all the details on how to enter to win. So now on to this week's episode. This week on the podcast, I'm sharing my conversation with fellow life coach and friend Cami Birdno. This was such a beautiful conversation, and having experienced trauma herself, Cami helps women heal sexual and complex trauma so that they can feel confident in their own bodies and their relationships. I'm so glad that there is someone out there like Cami helping people heal. You're going to love this conversation. All right. Welcome to the podcast. I am here with my friend and fellow coach colleague, Cami Birdno. And I'm so excited to have her join me today on the podcast. And the fun thing about Cami is we knew each other before we both decided we were going to be life coaches. Well, I should say we both decided we weren't going to be life coaches.
Yes, that's right.
And we are. So, anyway, I'm going to turn the time over to Cami and let her introduce herself, tell us a little about you, Cami, and then
Yeah.
what led you on this path.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you so much for having me, Jill. Yeah, this is so fun. And it is really so fun to come back together because we haven't chatted since we had
Oh,
both said we weren't going to be life coaches. We were just there to learn and all the things,
yep.
right? So it is really fun to just see our paths and our journeys. And so, yeah, just a little bit about me. Like, I am an Arizona girl and I'm an Arizona mountain girl. So most people think of Arizona and think of the desert. And we live in the mountains and I love it. I love that because part of my happy place is getting outside. And that's where I do a lot of my processing of trauma. And so, yeah, I am now a trauma coach. And kind of what led me to that was actually first, like you and I met doing a thing for Jody Moore. And so she and doing life coaching was kind of like my first step because I was so deep in trauma that I only had black and white thinking and I could only see things one way, right? So being able to go to her thing and being coached first with Jody started to open up my mindset to where I could start to believe this whole idea of ands and both and nuance. And for me, that was like the bedrock that my trauma needed to be able to come forth. Because it tried to come. So my experience is that mine was all repressed and suppressed. So repressed means that the memories were so difficult for me that like they were shoved down in my unconscious that I couldn't remember them at all. And then suppressed means that there were times that like certain images or certain things would start to come up and I would think I was crazy for one and be like, did that really happen to me? Like, I can't believe any of that is really true. And I would deliberately shove them down, right? So that's like the suppressing. Um, and so it started then, my trauma was trying to get out because our trauma is never meant to stay in our bodies. But it kept trying and there was no space that wasn't safe for it to come out, like within my own system, within my mind, my heart, my body, my spirit, none of it. Like it wasn't safe. And so coaching is what started to open up that pathway. And then I started to realize once coaching happened, and then actually I took a course from Jennifer Finlayson Fife. And I don't know if you heard of her or any of your audience, but she teaches a course called Art of Desire. And it's a sexuality course, but it's also just a starting to own your desires. And I had suppressed that whole part of me too. Like I didn't have desires. I didn't really want to do anything. I would just do whatever anybody suggested. Like I really did not have my own mind, my own self. And so taking her class and starting to have like the deep questions that she offered and realizing what my go-to was actually is what, and because I'd had coaching and had the ability for this ands in both, is what actually made it a safe place. And all my trauma actually came up when I was taking her course. Um, and I had, just things open up, these floodgates of memories, of sensations, of all sorts of things happening. And then I started to realize I have these great reframes now with coaching, but like my body is responding in a totally different way and it's not making sense. And I can't even like get my body to believe anything that I can think. And so that's when I started to realize, oh, trauma is not just a mind thing. Like we need the education, we need, they call it top down. So we need to understand and have the ability to look at ands and boths and not be so black and white. And we need to have the education of what is happening in our body and trauma. But like we need what's called body-based, bottom-up type of modalities to be able to find the different places the trauma is stored in our bodies and actually release it and get it out of our bodies. And so that is kind of what has led me to where I am now and being able to combine coaching with this body-based stuff. And then I also bring on what I call a sideways, which is it's very powerful to start recognizing how we're viewing ourselves, both what we're thinking about and how our body is responding. Because if we're super judgmental, super shameful, we actually can cause our trauma to get stuck again, or we hinder its ability to complete its energy cycle and get out of our body. And so I really focus on this sideways and learning to be compassionate and mindful and those type of things. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that's
love that.
a
I love
lot.
that so much. Yeah. Well, and we were talking beforehand, and I said this is probably one of the more serious
Hmm.
conversations that I've
Yeah.
had on this podcast, but I think it's very needed. I think that we hear more and more about trauma informed and somatic
Hmm.
healing and things like
Yes.
that. And so I
Yes.
think it's a very relevant and needed topic. And
Yeah.
I thought you would be perfect for this. So I'm so glad
Oh, thank you.
that you're joining me and you're using your experience to bless other
Yeah.
people, which I think is beautiful because you understand the nuances of all of it.
Hmm.
I know with my clients too, I think, like you said, I love how you said the sideways, because I
Hmm.
really think that that is sometimes we overlook that piece. Like
Hmm.
when we're trying to make progress in our life, whether it's trauma or big T or little T trauma, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's we've got to have that self-compassion and love and acceptance to be able to move through whatever's going to help you move to healing, right? We've got to
Hmm.
include that, or I love how you explain that. It just blocks you from
Yeah.
moving forward when you don't combine that.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So
And I think
you,
can I just add
sorry.
one thing real fast? I think
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
super powerful that you brought in the big T and the little T, right? Because lots of times, and in fact, if you look in the trauma world, like people will tell you, there's no way any person can go throughout their life without experiencing some form of trauma,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it does come in so many different forms. And just starting
Yes.
to recognize like the big T is really like what everybody would say, oh yeah, that's traumatic. But also knowing that like even the big T, some people will be traumatized by that experience and some people won't, right? It's so individualized. And then the same thing with the little T's. Those are like the things that are so minimal that we like minimize all the time because they happen and we can't like pinpoint one thing. And, and I personally have both in my experience of trauma, right? And so being able to work through both of those, it's different and yet the same because it's the same in the fact that our body is what teaches us how to heal. So the tools that I offer and teach my clients are being able to learn how your body has responded in trauma, because that information is also the exact way that your body will help you get out of trauma. And it's
Oh,
such a
that's so
beautiful
beautiful.
thing to learn
Yeah.
to come home to your body. Because I
Yeah.
was scared to death of my body. Like
Yeah, that's
I
so
didn't, yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Speak to that a little bit. Like, do you have a like an example of where
yeah,
somebody one way their body was kind of dealing with the trauma, but how it did in turn come full circle and help them
yeah,
heal? I'd
yeah,
love
for
a
sure.
real example. Do you have one?
Yes, yeah. And I'll go ahead and give one of mine just
Okay.
because each client, I like to let their experience be theirs, right? And their words be theirs.
Yes.
But for me, like, so for instance, with Jody, right? When she would even be talking about feelings and things like that, like I, was so like numbed out to my body. That was my experience. Like I said, I suppressed. So I went into a lot of freeze and what is called the fawn, where the fawn is like you're still in this mode of freezing yourself, but you're able to pretend and you're able to people please and you're able to appease everybody else and you look like you're fine and like there's not a problem, right?
Right.
And so I had shut down all my emotions and like had totally like it was really hard for me to even get this whole idea in the coaching world of like a feeling and what that means. Like I'm like I don't feel anything from like here down. And like
Yeah.
anything from here up is just like spiraling and swirling and crazy all the time, right? And so for me that was kind of the one experience first of just being like I don't know what you're talking about. Like when people would say like I feel anxiety or I feel sadness in my chest, I literally didn't feel anything. Like I was like, there's nothing there. Like I was so disconnected from my body. And so then when my trauma surfaced and I was flooded with all of these emotions, right? Like then that was terrifying because I only, again, which makes sense because I only knew the black and white. I knew no feeling or I knew this overwhelming feeling that took control of my body.
Yeah.
And it was so scary. Both of those were so scary, right? This whole to realize like I can totally numb out. People can see things happening in my body that I actually literally can't see and definitely can't feel. Like I would be shaking And because it's like that whole like beach ball type concept, right? Where you're holding stuff down. And I was trying to hold everything down so hard that like it literally physiologically made my body start shaking, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't see that that was happening, right? So I was so numbed out to that. Um, and had experiences where people helped me see, like they would hold my hands and let their hands go limp and kind of shake with my own. And I would be like, oh, that's me. Like I'm really causing that shaking, type of a thing that was just scary for me to see. And
Yeah.
then the tools then of starting to like very slowly in trauma, we take things very slowly. Peter Levine talks about like you chip away at it, like you go into it safely, chip a little piece and then come back out. And you learn tools to then go in a little more. You never go headlong into trauma because then you're just in trauma mode again. Right. So the tools are to go slowly, very slowly, which is hard because in trauma, you just want to be done with it. You just want to get
You
it
want to
over.
move away.
Experience this anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that would be my experience of slowly coming in, coming home. And it was somatic work that first had me where I was like, oh, I actually am owning my body again. Peter Levine does this felt sense exercise where you're like tracing one hand on the other hand. And when I first did it, like again, that whole numbness, like I really literally couldn't feel my hands touching each other. And I knew that
Wow.
was probably weird, but I was like, but that's my normal, right? And there was parts of me that's like, really? Like this is too woo-woo. Like, do really people actually feel their hands? Like that had just been my experience for so long that I thought it was just crazy, this whole idea,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and then I know people who feel so much that like the idea of it not being overwhelming all the time is again foreign to them, right? And so
Yeah.
it's that being able to rein that in, or for me, being able to bring some of that up to finally, I did that exercise and I remember there's a part at the end where he says, if I'm working on my left hand, then he says like I get to then say the words of this is my left hand. My left hand is part of my body and my left hand belongs to me. And when I had that moment where I could actually feel sensation, and then those words were tied to it. For me, that was the beginning of starting to reclaim my body because my trauma story had been for so long that my body is not my own, which is why I had numbed out. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so
So,
beautiful. I'm kind of tearing up because
me too,
that's
as I
just
think
so
about it.
yeah, like that's really something that I hadn't considered. Just that detachment and how learning how to reattach and to
Yeah.
claim the parts of your body or claim yourself can be
Mhm.
so healing through that emotional um experience. So
Yeah.
wow, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So, tell my listeners who you typically work with
Yeah.
and maybe one or however many you want, things that you notice as you work with them. And you've
Yeah.
kind of touched on some of them, but if there's just what do you help them do? And what do
Yeah.
you notice that they're struggling with? I'd love
Yeah.
to explain that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say some of the biggest issues and things that I see that they're struggling with, right? When they come to me, I guess there's kind of like two categories. There's people who for sure know that they have trauma and they then have all these triggers that are constantly happening to them. And so they feel this, excuse me, they feel this sense of helplessness and out of control, right? And then also there's all this fear coupled on because they don't know when the next trigger is going to come, and then we respond differently, whether we try to make sure that we're not around people in certain places that we know that will get triggered, right? So our lives start to change, or we recognize that we've been doing that our whole life and we don't want to do that anymore, type of a thing.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
we find that and it really just depends on what phase or state of survival that you go to. Like if people who go to fight all the time, they'll notice that like, they're constantly angry. They're always picking a fight and looking for one, even if it's not there, type of a thing. Or they're always voicing their opinion, always over other people, type of a thing. Or they're, the flee is the runaway, right? But in all of these instances, whether we're fighting, fleeing, freezing, or doing that fawn, um, all of it has that helpless fear, like, I can't stop this. This is controlling me. And so people come because they know they have these triggers. They want to change them. Lots of times they'll have these like, I recognize that I'm overreacting if you're in the fight or the flee response, right? Or I'm underreacting. Like, I wish I would have said something if you're in the freeze or the fawn response, or I said something, but it's not what I really wanted to say. I just said it because I knew they wanted me to say it, those type of things, and
Mm-hmm.
wanting to get out of that. So they're realizing they're over responding, under responding. And then the other group that comes are people who are like, I just feel like I want to learn more about trauma. Like, I think maybe there's something there, but really I'm just here for the education, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I haven't found one client yet who's come to me with that, who then doesn't realize, oh, lots of those usually are the little T traumas, right? That they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, so and they'll share something, as we're working through these tools, memories will come up. And sometimes it'll just be like a snapshot real fast, and they'll be like, oh, this is coming up. I didn't remember that, or I didn't know that this was tied. And it's being able to have that safe space for somebody to share something and then be able for them to recognize their truth of, oh, that was actually really traumatic for me. Like, I felt in that moment that like the rug was pulled out from me, or that I had to fragment myself in order to be able to keep functioning, right? That I had to compartmentalize type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some things that I have noticed, and people have come with each of those.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of always the undercurrent there of, I'm stuck. I don't know
Yeah.
how to move forward.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
know that I need something, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. So what would you say your process is like, or how do you help them navigate
Yeah.
that stuckness, I guess?
Yeah. So I would say that the first thing is kind of like a twofold, is to first just start giving them trauma education so that they don't start minimizing their experience, right? Because it's so easy when we come forward to them be like, well, mine's really not that bad. Like, I really probably shouldn't be here. It really isn't, this big of a deal. Someone
Mm-hmm.
else has it way worse. And that again is just coping. So it's starting to help them realize what their coping is, how they're wanting to minimize it, or say, or even if it's just like fear, like, this is too scary, so I'm going to minimize it, right? Like, I
Yeah,
don't want to go
right.
here. And so it's just starting to help them understand trauma education, understand that their body is responding in a normal way. And then, kind of in the same vein, like I'm trying to do it almost at the same time, because it's so powerful to start gaining and building trust within our body so that we can let our body speak to us and us learn to listen. Because, like I said at the first, right? Like, our body really does know how to heal. And so it's these learning tools to make it safe to go into our body, to make it safe to be present with ourselves, and even, understand what that possibly means.
Yeah, yeah.
And those are, I have like a basic foundation program that's a 16-week long program where I teach, like, 1 week we'll be teaching concepts of trauma, and the next week we will be embodying it. We'll be getting into our bodies. We'll be finding ways to create this safety within. And in trauma work, they call it internal resourcing. So we're finding these experiences that we are creating inside, in also the same space, in this external space, right? Because they're with me as their coach. So now they have external resources, internal resources where it's safe and where
Mm-hmm.
they can go back to those. So it's this part of building capacity in our body to be able to go into the side of trauma, right? Because otherwise, like, we're so, um, our body won't let us go into trauma. It won't tell us the information of the trauma because it's not safe. So we are creating that space. So
Mm-hmm.
does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, totally. So beautiful. So do you find, like, as you've worked with people, do you find that they can naturally do that, or is it take time? Like, what do you notice as
I
they
mean,
in discovering all of this?
yeah, it definitely takes time, right? But it's amazing to me. It's always around like the 5, 6 week mark of my program that they start to have this shift of starting to be like, oh, it's not as scary as I thought it would be, or, oh, I actually can see how I'm like trusting myself. I actually can see how there's parts of me, and I do like this inner child work and parts work kind of interwoven in between too, of like, oh, I actually have wisdom within me. Like, this information, like I didn't even know I had, and I know it came from me, from like this core within me. And it's so cool because each person's journey is so different and so unique. And I love just like, as a coach, that we don't have an agenda, right? We don't like give our clients something. And it's the same thing in this coaching space around trauma is that like I give them certain tools and their body just responds. And it's amazing. And I offer like four main body-based modality tools. And we start because like each person's body will respond differently, right? So I give them like the somatic. We do what's called polyvagal, which really helps you get into your different states of survival in the nervous system. We do chakra and yoga work and meditation type things, right? Um, and we do then like the subtle body, which is again like getting into that energy cycle type stuff of our body and just really being able to, I just give little pieces and we find out which ones they are drawn to and which one their body responds to. And then we use that one kind of consecutively for the first little bit before we start adding more in, right? So it's really
Yeah.
cool to just like let each person's body respond to the one
Yeah.
that speaks to them. And I've been amazed every single time my clients will remember something from their past of how they're like, oh, I did something similar to this when I was a little kid, right? Their body was trying to regulate them, regulate their experiences, and they
Yeah.
didn't understand and didn't know. So then to be able to, 'cause so then it's like, oh yeah, you already have that internal resource from when you were a kid. Now let's like explain how that's working and use that same type thing with these modalities. And it is so beautiful to watch. It's
Yeah.
awe-inspiring to me.
Yeah. That is so cool. I think that those of us that maybe aren't immersed in this, in the
Mhm.
trauma and
Right.
that kind of healing, just to hear that, like it just sounds so beautiful to see the power that the
Yeah.
body has.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
cool.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. Is there anything else that you want? Like, do you see where people stumble as you work with them? Are there areas that are harder maybe than others as they move through this experience?
Yeah. Yeah. So, each person is a little different. It really depends, like, if it's hard, if they've dissociated for a long time, then it is really hard for them to trust the process of getting into their body, right? So we do much smaller baby steps. And then there's some people who um, those are people who have dissociated and numbed out and have gone very much into the freeze and the fawn. So especially with fawning, it's really important to help them start using their voice, right? To really help them start being able to, even to me, to like really use language to express this, even if it's like, I can't really explain this, but this is kind of what's happening, right? Like just really honoring that. And then when people who feel a lot, who often go into that flight or that flee, right, where they already are really activated and have a lot of hypervigilance and things like that, right? Their stumbling block then is being able to let the mindful calm come in, be able to get into their top when the bottom is trying to take over. And so it's
Mm,
the tools to be able to help regulate so that they have access to their prefrontal cortex, access to their wisdom of their body that is a language that's not controlled by this hyper vigilant mobility type of a state. And so
mhm,
it depends on the survival trauma state that is your go-to, and knowing that like each situation can be different, right? Like for me, certain relationships, like with my kids, for instance, I go into the fight mode with my kids a lot.
mhm.
Whereas with my husband and my like family of origin, I go into the fawn and the freeze response. And then with like my in-laws, I go into the flee response. Right. So it
Right.
really is just starting to
Yeah.
recognize like different relationships, we respond differently
Yeah.
and being able to start owning like, oh, my trauma did that. And it doesn't mean it's an excuse, but now I have information. And because it did that, now I know different type things that I can do for that instance, but knowing that that will work here, but it doesn't work over here
Yeah.
and
So
being
interesting.
okay with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the word that was popping into my mind is
Hmm.
nuanced. It's
Yeah.
just this, the nuance of it all. It's
Yeah.
just right? Like everybody's different, and there's just so many nuances to the
Yeah.
process. So it sounds
Yeah.
like you have a lot of knowledge and resources and tools that will help people as they navigate this trauma
Yeah.
in their life. I just think that is so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So
Yes.
beautiful. So, is there anything that you would love to share with the audience?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one thing I would love to offer is just kind of offering this new narrative, right? Of like of the whole ands and boths, right? Which I do find that like women in the midlife and as their seasons that it just generally starts to happen, right? So just
Hmm.
knowing that like it makes sense that like trauma or these realizations would be coming now
Hmm.
instead of earlier, right?
Hmm.
Like, and just in general, trauma education, like it's very common for trauma to come back 20, 30, 40 years after it first happens, right?
Hmm.
And then, so just kind of like that information, right? Of like, it makes sense, whatever you're experiencing. And also to start to get present, which is one of those somatic experiencing type tools, right? And so something I would offer is to just give yourself the space to pause for just a moment and to take a deep breath, just a big inhale and an exhale, and just kind of notice um like where that breath goes. So do you mind if we just do a
I
quick
would love
like
this.
exercise together?
Yes,
Okay,
please, please,
perfect.
please.
Yeah. So I love to just pause for a moment. So if I was to pause and just like I was feeling overwhelmed or I was feeling burned out or I was just feeling like I didn't really respond how I wanted to. You know, lots of times we think that as our kids are growing older, they're becoming adults and we're like, I didn't really talk to them the way I would want to, right? And just like as that settles in for a minute, this uncomfortableness, to just be able to pause for a moment and to look around your space for just a minute, whether that be in your home, outside. We call it orienting in polyvagal work. And then to go ahead and just take an inhale. So I invite you to do that. Just an inhale and an exhale. And then just notice, where did that inhale go and that exhale? Was it solely in your chest? Did it fill up your rib cage? Did it go into your belly? And then and maybe you didn't even notice, you just took a breath, right? So again, I invite you to take another inhale and an exhale and notice where the breath goes this time. So another inhale and an exhale. And just notice where it filled up. So just for you, Jill, where did that fill up? Where did your
Yeah,
breath go?
the first time we did it, I noticed it was like mostly my chest, and then I noticed a little like after belly or something.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
second time when I really was with it, it did fill up my chest and my belly. It just really expanded that
Right.
second time. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So that's just like, and notice like when we get into our body in that space, we literally, because we're listening to our body and paying attention to it, we're not thinking about all the things that we were just thinking about,
Mhm.
right? And so it is able to pull us into like this narrow focus that we need that is all about self and connecting with self before we then decide who we want to be in the world and how we want to show up in the world,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
I
And then
love.
like I would then do lots more exercises and we would practice putting it in different places and really go into that. What we kind of did where we paid so much attention to where the breath went is somatic work where you're feeling from the inside out, right? And so then we would kind of follow some of those sensations a little bit. But that's
Yeah.
just one that's really fast, easy to do at any time to come
And
back home
I
to
love that.
ourselves.
Yeah. And I love another thing Cami does, I've noticed on her Instagram is you'll
Mhm.
often do let's get into our bodies
Yes,
and
yes,
walk people through a short exercise that
yeah,
helps them kind of self regulate,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the great thing about that is that it's like it helps anybody, whether you're actively in trauma, right? Or just you just need to regulate, right? So it
Yeah.
helps if you're being, like we talk about the top down, meaning like you have a thought that will then cause a feeling and you can regulate that way. you have like this bottom up from trauma, right? Where your body sensation causes something. And then you might have a thought about that, right? But like those get into your body, all of those being present do help you, whatever it might be
Yeah.
that's coming
Yeah.
on. But yeah, I do
Yeah.
those. They come out either Mondays or Tuesdays.
Awesome. I love it. And I love how you said just pause. That's something that I try to teach my clients too. And
Yes.
Viktor Frankl, right, talks about
Mhm.
that space between stimulus and response is where
Yes.
agency is. And we
Yes.
really want to access our full agency. We
Mhm.
have to allow for that pause. That's where
Mhm.
choice is made. Yeah. So
Yes. Yes.
I just love that. The whole idea of a pause.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
So that
Yeah.
was
And real quick, I just want to offer
yeah.
like that is part of the issue with trauma is like when trauma is in our system and everything from the past, it gets stacked on top of each other, right? So everything from the past comes into our present, like we have lost choice
Yeah.
because now we're just acting from survival, right? And so these body-based tools helps us get that pause back,
Mhm. Oh, I love how you
right?
clarified that. Yeah, because someone that has experienced something traumatic, yeah,
Hmm.
their body is the one, right,
Yes.
is sensing the safety or the not the danger or the
Yeah.
unsafety, right? That's a
Yeah.
word,
Yeah.
right? So yeah,
Totally
I
is.
love how yeah, so there it's teaching you how to create that pause again. Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
beautiful.
So
So
we talk
beautiful.
about like recreating a healthy nervous system, right? Because you want
Yeah,
your body's survival to come online. It is there to
totally.
protect you. But when
Yes.
it's in overuse, it's not actually able to protect you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
need to take away the trauma from that nervous system so it can be healthy
Yeah.
and get those out of our bodies. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's such
Oh,
a beautiful
love
thing,
it.
beautiful
Yeah.
process. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. You're doing such beautiful things. Beautiful
Thank
things.
you.
So, if people want to find you, because I know that someone listening to this needed to hear this today. Oh, I don't know why. Someone to hear this today.
Yeah. Thank
So,
you for
um,
providing the space for that.
yeah. So, how can they find you? How can they connect with you? Share
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I have my website, which is camibirdno.com. And I think you'll have links for all of these
Yes,
too,
they'll be in
right?
the show
Okay.
notes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Cami Birdno Coaching. I have a LinkedIn account as well. And then my podcast, I have my podcast, which is the name of my program, which is Go All In to Let Go. And so I have episodes in there. And then, yeah, I also have, some freebies. I have um, um, three-step process to heal that kind of goes into more depth about the bottom up, the top down, and this sideways. And, I give information as well as there's videos and that I give you tools and we practice, right? So you can kind of see my style. Um, and that. And then yes, on my Instagram and Facebook, I do that get into your body for a minute, each week that has just like these great tools and free resources. I am going to be doing a kind of a bigger version of that in March. Well, where I will do a 5-day challenge where there will be, will 5 days get into our body in a little bit more depth than just a minute. So you can follow that on my socials and be able to get tune in for that for when each of those are. But yeah. And then, yeah, definitely join my newsletter. It's Wacky Wonderful Wednesday. And I
Love
give
it.
lots of tips in there too each week, for
Yeah.
different tools that you can use. And I try to give so many different varieties again because I know our bodies are so unique and being able to like just like if you look at something and it doesn't resonate, like that's fine. Know that like your body is leading you. You really can trust your body's wisdom. It knows how to heal and it will perk up for the things that it needs.
Yeah.
So you can trust that.
Oh, I love it so much. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on and
Yeah.
sharing your goodness with
Yeah.
us.
Thank you so much for asking me and
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So good. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, I would love it if you would share it with your friends and family and leave me a rating and review. If you'd like to learn more about what life coaching is, please schedule a free discovery call with me where we can work together through something that's causing you a problem. Just go to my website, seasons-coaching.com, And you can also find information about my Seasons of Joy one-on-one coaching program and my Seasons of Joy community. Have a joyful week, and I'll see you next time.